Hello, this is Karen Burroughs Hannsberry. I'm the author of Film Noir, The Bad Girls of Film, and Bad Boys, The Actors of Film Noir, as well as the editor of the bi-monthly film noir newsletter, The Dark Pages. It's a pleasure to be here with you to talk about The Red House, starring the great Edward G. Robinson. It was based on a novel by the same name by George Agnew Chamberlain, and I'll be talking about some of the differences between the film and the book throughout this commentary. So if you plan on reading the book, let this serve as your spoiler alert. Before the movie begins, I'd like you to pay attention to the music you hear right now. It was composed by Miklós Rózsa, who scored many classic films including Double Indemnity and The Strange Love of Martha Ivers, both which, by the way, this opening theme reminds me of. More about Rózsa and the music in a bit. The film, whose working title was No Trespassing, earned rave reviews when it was released. One critic called it top of the barrel film fare, and another labeled it the best atmospheric movie to come out of Hollywood in some time. The critic for the Democrat and Chronicle in Rochester, New York, told his readers, "You'll look for a long while before you run across a motion picture with better all-around acting than that in The Red House." And the review in the North Hollywood Valley Times said, "The Red House teaches something to the current crop of Hollywood picture makers. It's this: the menace of a plot need not necessarily be a human with a machine gun and a mow 'em down complex." The critics also found many different ways to describe the movie, from a blood-tingling melodrama to as glum as the frogs croaking in the forest. And the film's publicity releases labeled it an idyllic romance and weird terror. But really, it's a picture that defies any kind of singular characterization. It can be considered a psychological thriller, a mystery, horror, or film noir, and under the noir umbrella, it can even be thought of as gothic noir or country noir. But the opening scenes of the film basically contradict all of these. If you didn't know what kind of movie you were about to see, you might expect some kind of homespun family picture as you take in the pleasant sunny day and watch the students as they smile and laugh together after school and listen to the bright and cheerful quality of the music. But in a few moments, the film will focus on three characters on this school bus, and as we view the facial expression of the young girl seated on the left, we get our first indication that we might not be in for a fun time. Take a look at her and you'll see what I mean.
Are we going swimming Sunday?
This is Meg, played by Allene Roberts, who's making her big screen debut here. If she doesn't look familiar or you don't recognize her name, I can see why. She was in only 11 feature films over a span of 5 years. She was born Emma Allene Roberts in 1928 in a suburb of Birmingham called Fairfield Highlands. When she was 11, her aunt sent her picture in to the New York Daily Mirror for a contest called America's Most Charming Child. Roberts eventually beat out around 85,000 other contestants, winning $1,000 and a Warner Brothers screen test. In a 2009 interview with author Laura Wagner, Roberts jokingly recalled that she flunked that test. Still, Roberts and her mother stayed in Los Angeles. Her mother got a job working as a seamstress at Fox, and Roberts enrolled in school and started taking acting classes. A casting director saw Roberts perform at her acting school one day, and she began contacting her for auditions. One of those was for The Red House. As part of the interview process, Roberts said she had lunch with the film's producer, Saul Lesser, who asked her if boys whistled at her when she went to the beach. When she told him that they did not, Lesser told her she had the part. She was just 17 years old and a student at Hollywood High School at the time. She took off 5 weeks from her classes to appear in the movie. Speaking of Saul Lesser, you may have noticed his name listed as producer on the film's title cards, and you may have also seen that the picture was a presentation of Thalia Productions. Thalia was the independent production company that Lesser created with the star of the film, Edward G. Robinson. According to Robinson's autobiography, All My Yesterdays, he became involved with the Red House in 1946 when Lesser told him about the screenplay while they were at the Hillcrest Country Club in Los Angeles. Lesser told Robinson he would be perfect for the film, but that they would have to form a production company and that Robinson's name would help them get financing as well as a release through United Artists. It's not known for sure why the name Thalia was selected, but Thalia means blooming or to flourish, so it's quite possible that Lesser wanted the name to reflect his determination to create successful films. Also, it's interesting to note that in March 1946, just a month before filming began, gossip columnist Luella Parsons announced that the lead role in The Red House would be played by Charles Laughton. If it's true that Lesser offered the part to Laughton first, Laughton may have ended up turning it down so he could star in Alfred Hitchcock's The Paradine Case, which began filming later that year. Lesser paid $60,000 to George Agnew Chamberlain for the film rights to The Red House, even though the novel received mixed reviews at best. The book was called vivid and arresting in one review, but another critic said it was disappointing in its lack of originality, and the reviewer for the Springfield, Massachusetts newspaper wrote, "Mr. Chamberlain has written many highly readable stories, but this mystery boogie woogie is not one of them." The Red House was first published in book form in 1943 and as a 5-week serial in the Saturday Evening Post in 1945. Over the course of his writing career, Chamberlain wrote more than 40 books and short stories. The Red House was the last of his 5 crime novels. In addition to The Red House, several of his other works were made into movies, including Scudda-Hoo, Scudda-Hay, and one of his books, The Phantom Filly, was the basis for 2 films, Home in Indiana and April Love. A couple of fun facts about Chamberlain: he wrote all of his novels in longhand, and he did all of his writing in a special chair. He once said, "That chair goes wherever I go." It's also noteworthy that 3 of the movies based on Chamberlain's books, The Red House, Scudda-Hoo, Scudda-Hay, and Home in Indiana, all starred Lon McCallister. And here's McCallister in this scene talking to Edward G. Robinson and Allene Roberts. Gossip columnist Hedda Hopper once called him the cutest boy the movies have hauled up out of obscurity since Mickey Rooney was discovered. He was born Herbert Alonzo McCallister Jr. in Los Angeles in 1923. When he was young, his parents divorced, and his grandparents lost their money in the stock market crash. The family's economic situation may have led to the 2 goals McCallister created for himself: to make a lot of money in the movies and to retire by the time he was 30. And, spoiler alert, he did both. One of McCallister's first appearances on screen was in 1936 in the Norma Shearer movie Romeo and Juliet, where he sang with the Maxwell Choristers. This was a group of about 40 boys, ages 9 to 14, that performed in films including Smiling Through, Tess of the Storm Country, The Power and the Glory, and It Happened One Night. You can clearly see McCallister singing in Romeo and Juliet during a masquerade ball, but there's a lesser-known picture released just a few months earlier that's considered to be McCallister's film debut. It's a musical called Let's Sing Again, and he reportedly appears as an orphan. But if you can spot McCallister in that one, you're doing better than I am. Now, I'm going to pause in my look at Lon McCallister to talk about a few differences between the film and George Chamberlain's novel. But first, let's listen for a bit at this dinner table conversation.
Bet nobody will believe me when I tell them I had supper here.
Why not, Nate?
Well, didn't you know you and Miss Ellen are known as the mysterious Morgans?
Are we?
Well, they won't say it anymore. Not when I tell them what a swell layout you've got here, and that you spread the best table in the valley.
It's because we're so self-sufficient here. We seldom have any need to go to town.
What else do they say about us, Nate?
Oh, nothing. Except things like Meg not being your daughter, or even related.
Why don't they ask me?
Well, I guess they'd rather whisper gossip than find out the truth.
What gossip?
Well, they say Meg's mother and father ran away and left her when she was still a baby.
Well, that's not true, Nate. Meg's mother and father went down south to find a new farm. They left Meg in our care.
They died down there in a runaway. Pete and I adopted Meg legally. There's nothing to be whispered about, Nate.
She was only 2 years old then.
There's nothing wrong with being adopted. I'm grateful.
Now, there are a few things I want to point out here. First off, there were a couple of name changes. In the book, Pete's last name is Yoakum, but it's Morgan in the movie. And we're told in the book that Nath's real name is Joe Nath. Also in the book, Pete and Ellen are twins. Now, in the scene we just watched, Pete and Ellen give an explanation of how Meg came to be part of their household, with Ellen saying that Meg's parents died in a runaway when they went down south to look for a new farm. And if you were wondering about her use of the term runaway, my take on it is that Ellen is saying they were killed in some sort of accident involving a horse drawn wagon or carriage, and that the horse got spooked and took off running, causing the wagon to crash or overturn. In the book, though, the reader is told that Meg's mother died in childbirth, and her father died 5 years later. The book goes on to say, quote, in reality, Pete was Meg's granduncle. But at that point in the book, which is in the first few pages, there's no explanation of what this means, so I'm going to leave that for now and pick it back up later. But I do want to mention one more important difference between the novel and the film, and that's that the book has some characters who are missing from the film entirely. In the book, Pete and Ellen have two workers on the farm, their black housekeeper Lottie and her son Lot, who works as a farmhand. Lottie grew up with Pete and Ellen. In fact, all three were nursed as babies by Lottie's mother, and the book refers to her as their foster sister. And outside of Pete and Ellen, Lottie is the only character who knows all of the family's secrets. Both Lottie and Lot figure significantly in the plot of the book, but I'll get into that a little later on as well. For now, I want to direct your attention to the film because coming up shortly is an extended scene with Nath running through Oxhead Woods. The entire 2.5-minute sequence has no dialogue. Instead, it's completely dominated by the score. Let's listen for a while and pay special attention to the different musical instruments that you'll hear, especially once Nath enters the woods. I'll tell you more about them in a bit.
What did you say to him?
Nate's a brave lad, but he's a fool. I warned him, but he wouldn't listen.
You warned him against what?
Courage isn't enough. He won't make it. He'll be back. He'll be back. As I told you earlier,
The composer of the score was Miklós Rózsa. He was born in Budapest, Hungary in 1907 and started composing music at the age of 8. During his time in Hollywood, he showed his versatility on a wide range of movies. He scored film noirs like Brute Force and Crisscross, epics including King of Kings, Ben-Hur, and Quo Vadis, dramas like The Lost Weekend, and even the Steve Martin comedy Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. During his career, he earned 17 Oscar nominations, and he won the award 3 times. The first of his Oscars was for Alfred Hitchcock's film Spellbound, which was a perfect recommendation for Saul Lesser to offer Rózsa the assignment for the Red House. Rózsa created distinctive themes for the film based on what was happening on screen. You can hear specific music for more than 30 scenes, taking the viewer through the entire film, from the opening narration and through scenes like Nath Explores the Woods, Sunday Dinner, Nathan Teller's Fight, Meg's Accident, and Pete's Death. To highlight the film's undercurrent of tension and mystery, Rózsa employed a women's choral group and 4 unique instruments: the vibraphone, the celeste, the novochord, and the theremin. The vibraphone is a keyboard percussion instrument that has metal bars like a xylophone, and a celeste, which is also part of the percussion family, is played like a piano and has a bell-like sound. The novochord is similar to the piano as well, but it can also make sounds like string instruments and woodwinds. And the theremin is an electronic instrument that's controlled without any physical contact. It consists of a box with 2 antennae, one controlling the pitch and the other controlling the volume. The performer plays it by moving their hands near the antenna. This movement creates electromagnetic fields that interfere with the antenna and change the pitch and volume of the sound that's being produced. Rózsa had previously used the theremin for both Spellbound and The Lost Weekend, and the eerie tones that the instrument produces have become synonymous with sci-fi movies and horror films. After The Red House was released, most of the notices focused on the performances of the cast, but several did mention Rózsa's score. The New York Times reviewer said the music was appropriately macabre, and a critic for a paper in Vancouver wrote that Rózsa's orchestrations were unobtrusive but consistently compelling. In the 1970s, Capitol Records made a deal with Rózsa to record a 12-minute suite of the film's score. It was released as part of RCA's classic film score series, which also included music from several other movies scored by Rózsa, including Double Indemnity, The Lost Weekend, and Ivanhoe. Then, 6 decades later, American composer Kevin Koska, who was a fan of the film's music, reconstructed and orchestrated the entire Red House score. It was recorded in 2011 in Glasgow, Scotland, by the Royal Scottish National Orchestra, conducted by Alan Wilson, and released the following year on a 2-disc CD by Entrada Records. And that release was nominated for an International Film Music Critics Award for Best Archival Re-Recording of an Existing Score. So Rózsa's music is still being appreciated many, many years after it was originally composed. Before I return to Lon McCallister, I want to talk about the actress who plays Nath's mother. You'll see her in a few minutes working at a sewing machine in her store. The part was played by Ona Munson, who you may know best as Belle Watling in Gone with the Wind. She was born Owena Walcott in 1903 in Portland, Oregon, and was reportedly a direct descendant of Oliver Walcott, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. When Munson was 14, she and her mother moved to New York, and she started her career as a toe dancer in a vaudeville troupe. She debuted on Broadway in the original cast of George White's Scandals, a Ziegfeld Follies type revue, and by the mid-1920s, she was starring in Broadway's No, No, Nanette. Munson eventually made her way to Hollywood, landing roles in pre-codes like Five Star Final with Edward G. Robinson. After 1931, she focused on the stage and radio, but she was back on screen in 1938, just around the time that producer David O. Selznick was wrapping up the Gone with the Wind casting. One of the few parts still open was Belle Watling, the prostitute with the heart of gold. Reportedly, 27 actresses were tested before Munson, including Ann Sheridan, Joan Blondell, and Mae West. Suffice it to say, Munson got the part, telling a reporter, "I was delighted. I had no idea the directors would give it to me." And this is Ona Munson here. She received good reviews for her bell waddling, but the success of the film didn't really give a boost to her career. 2 years later, she played the Chinese owner of a gambling house in The Shanghai Gesture. It's more appreciated today, but the movie wasn't a hit when it was released, and Munson's reviews were mixed at best. And to add insult to injury, she had to undergo a grueling 4-hour makeup regime every day to be transformed into her character. Her forehead and eyebrows were shaved, her eyelashes were trimmed, and she got an infection from the spirit gum that was applied to her scalp. Unfortunately, this would be the last noteworthy part in Munson's career. She later blamed the character of Belle Watling for typecasting her, and her last feature film appearance was this small role in The Red House. Now, I'm going to stop here for a moment because I want you to hear something Nate's mother is going to say about a local physician named Dr. Byrne. Let's listen.
They eat good. I mean, well. A couple of things got me wondering. How did Pete Morgan lose his leg?
He fell down a cliff in the Oxhead Woods. It was a long time ago. You were still a baby. It was Dr. Byrne's first case in the valley. He amputated the leg on the Morgan kitchen table.
I wonder if it's the one I ate at.
That was the first time Dr. Byrne ever met Ellen Morgan. Everybody knew he fell in love with her, but nothing ever came of it.
I wonder why. Still a bachelor.
I don't know. They still act like they love each other the few times I've seen them meet. But she chose to devote her life to her brother Pete, I guess. Seems a shame.
I wanted to call your attention to that information about Ellen and Dr. Byrne because this is another difference between the book and the film. Dr. Byrne is a character in the book, but he's only on hand for treating patients, and his main contribution to the plot is that he's so overworked that he falls asleep in his car and fails to tell police about the shooting in the woods. There's not a shred of unrequited love between him and Ellen, though. Now, returning to Ona Munson, outside of her career, she had a highly publicized affair with director Ernst Lubitsch, and she reportedly had romantic relationships with actress Alla Nazimova and writer Mercedes DaCosta. She was also married 3 times. Her third marriage in 1950 was to artist and set designer Eugene Berman. The wedding took place in the Beverly Hills home of Russian composer Igor Stravinsky. Although her screen career was behind her, she continued acting on the stage, she made a few TV appearances, and she purchased an interest in a soft drink company, telling the press that everyone in the theater should be involved in some kind of business so they could have an income when they weren't working. But Munson's personal life during these years was shrouded in mystery. There's a reference to an unspecified surgical procedure and suggestions that she was taking medications for an unnamed illness. Sources also indicate that she may have been suffering from depression. The only thing that's known for sure is that on February 11, 1955, her husband found her lifeless body in their apartment on Manhattan's Upper West Side. Munson had taken an overdose of barbiturates and left a note that said, "This is the only way I know to be free again. Please don't follow me." She was just 51 years old. 5 years after her death, she was posthumously honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Now, as we see Nath making his way out of the woods, let's continue our look at Lon McCallister. When I left off, he had just appeared in his first feature films in 1936. For the next several years, he was in more than 24 films as an extra or in bit parts credited as Bud McCallister. He finally got his big break when he was cast in the 1943 film Stage Door Canteen. This was a World War II picture that featured cameos from more than 50 celebrities, with a dramatic story provided by mostly unknown performers like McCallister. He played a baby-faced soldier from California who ends up doing a scene from Shakespeare with Broadway star Katharine Cornell. The producer of Stage Door Canteen was none other than Saul Lesser. By then, Lesser was known for producing low-budget westerns and a series of Tarzan pictures starring Olympic swimming champ Johnny Weissmuller. After Stage Door Canteen was released, McCallister was drafted into the Army. Before he left, he signed a long-term contract with Lesser that had 2 conditions. One, that no false statements would be released about him for publicity reasons, and 2, that Lesser would never put him in one of his Tarzan pictures. It was Lesser who changed McCallister's first name from Bud to Lon. Also, in another Red House connection, the screenplay for Stage Door Canteen was written by the writer and director for the Red House, Delmer Daves. I'll tell you all about him coming up next. The Red House was McCallister's first film after the war ended, and Saul Lesser had bought the film rights with McCallister in mind. As for his performance in the Red House, McCallister was usually lumped in with the applause given by critics for all four of the young members of the cast. But he was singled out by a few, including Wanda Hale in the New York Daily News, who said he did a very fine piece of acting, and the critic for Variety, who praised his all-around convincing job. It turned out, though, that the Red House would be the highlight of McCallister's acting career. He would only appear in 7 more films, and 4 of these would have the actor working with animals: dogs in Thunder in the Valley, a cougar in The Big Cat, and horses in The Story of Seabiscuit and Boy from Indiana. By the time McCallister left acting behind, he owned 2 apartment houses and a house on Malibu Beach. According to film critic Rex Reed, McCallister had purchased the Malibu Beach home during World War II. In his 1969 book, Conversations in the Raw, Reed wrote, "When the beach at Malibu was blacked out and rumors of Japanese subs sent the beach dwellers into panic, everyone sold out and moved away except McCallister, who bought a vast house for $18,000. Today, the rental alone on that house supports the ex-star and is worth more than $250,000. McCallister went on to become a successful real estate speculator. In addition to the Malibu Beach house, he owned several houses and apartment buildings in Los Angeles, property in Lake Tahoe, and a lodge in Northern California. And speaking of McCallister's beach house in Malibu, he lived there for many years with actor William Ith, who I know best from the Oxbow incident and the house on 92nd Street. McCallister and Ith had been in a romantic relationship since they met in the early 1940s. It even survived the brief marriage Ith had. McCallister and Ith also shared some creative ventures related to travel. On one of their overseas vacations, they got the idea to film the sites they visited and then sell the footage to news stations and film libraries. And they were hired by Hilton Hotels to shoot travel films around the world. The couple remained together until Ith's death in 1957 at the age of 38. As for McCallister, he would live another 48 years, dying in 2005 at the age of 82. A few years before his death, McCallister was interviewed for a book called Who's Who in Hollywood. He told the author David Reagan, "Being a movie star was great, but I never considered doing it for a lifetime. I wanted to be myself, to go where I pleased, without causing a traffic jam. I've succeeded in this, and I'm happy." Now, let's go behind the camera and focus on the writing, directing, and cinematography for the film. As I said, the film was directed by Delmer Daves, who also wrote the screenplay, but he had uncredited input on the writing from Albert Maltz, who was a playwright, fiction writer, and screenwriter. Maltz had an impressive pedigree that included co-writing This Gun for Hire, starring Veronica Lake and Alan Ladd. He was also nominated for an Oscar for writing the screenplay for the John Garfield movie Pride of the Marines. The same year that The Red House was released, Maltz became one of the Hollywood 10. This was a group of screenwriters, directors, and producers who refused to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee, which investigated individuals and organizations suspected of communist ties. The members of the Hollywood 10, including Albert Maltz, were found guilty of contempt of Congress and sent to prison. Maltz served 10 months before he was released. After his release, he continued writing under pseudonyms, but he wouldn't receive an on-screen credit under his real name until 1970 on the screenplay for Two Mules for Sister Sarah. Now, back to Delmer Daves. He was born in 1904 in San Francisco. It's said that as a child, he lived for a time on the Hopi and Navajo Indian reservations, which is an experience that certainly would have come in handy on the westerns he would write and direct years later. He majored in law at Stanford University, but by the time he graduated, he was far more interested in being part of the movie industry than being a lawyer. And one source says Daves was encouraged by his Stanford classmate, actor Lloyd Nolan, who reportedly told him, "You don't want to be a lawyer, Del. Let's go down to the Pasadena Playhouse and do what we really love." Daves started out as a prop assistant on the silent film The Covered Wagon in 1923, and he eventually started contributing original treatments, adapting existing works, and submitting screenplays. Some of his best-known screenplays were for The Petrified Forest, which starred Bette Davis, Leslie Howard, and Humphrey Bogart, Love Affair with Irene Dunne and Charles Boyer, which would be remade as An Affair to Remember, Dark Passage, the Bogart and Bacall film noir, where we see half the movie from Bogart's point of view, and the Sandra Dee Troy Donahue melodrama, A Summer Place. In the early 1940s, Daves teamed up with Albert Maltz to write the screenplay for a Warner Brothers war picture called Destination Tokyo. This led to an opportunity for him to direct, even though he would later say, "I didn't know what I was letting myself in for." Daves became known for his orderly and systematic approach to directing. One of his techniques was to sketch each scene in a small square printed on his script next to the dialogue. This allowed him to keep a record of each camera angle, which assisted in the final editing process. Daves would go on to direct nearly 30 pictures, including one of my favorite Tony Curtis movies, the woefully underrated Kings Go Forth. For many of the films he directed, Daves wrote the screenplay as well, the way he did with The Red House. In a 1959 interview, he said he liked performing both roles because he could dictate the tone as a writer and preserve it as a director. Overall, Daves earned mostly positive reviews for his work on The Red House, with critics labeling his efforts skillful and intelligent. In the New York World Tribune, Otis Guernsey said that An Ordinary Mystery had received a booster charge of good direction, and the critic for the New York Journal American found that Daves effectively sustained the impending doom atmosphere. In the New York Daily News, Wanda Hale wrote, "The leisurely presentation, expert handling of details, and mounting suspense gives the illusion that you are a silent witness to the mysterious proceedings." However, several reviews talked about the film's pacing. Mildred Martin in the Philadelphia Inquirer said that Daves had, quote, "mistaken a snail-like tempo for the best means of creating suspense," while the critic for Variety complained that the movie took too long in getting to its climax. In the Brooklyn Eagle, Herbert Cohn also mentioned the slow unfolding of the story, but he added that Daves occasionally created an air of terror that was worthy of an Alfred Hitchcock or Fritz Lang, and that was some high praise right there. After The Red House, Daves directed several westerns. 3 of these starred Glenn Ford, 3:10 to Yuma, Jubal, and Cowboy, which earned him a nomination from the Directors Guild of America. Another standout western was Broken Arrow, starring James Stewart. This film became known for depicting Native Americans in a more positive and realistic light than had been seen in most westerns up to that time. By the way, the screenplay for Broken Arrow was credited to Michael Blankford, but he was just a front. It was actually written by Albert Maltz. In a few cases, like with A Summer Place and Broken Arrow, Dave served as producer as well. He was also the director, producer, and screenwriter for Spencer's Mountain, which starred Henry Fonda and Maureen O'Hara, and served as the inspiration for the long-running CBS TV series The Waltons. In 1965, he wrote and directed his second picture starring O'Hara, The Battle of the Villa Florida, but this would be his last feature film, and he died 12 years later at the age of 73. Now, let's stay behind the camera for a little longer and take a look at the cinematographer for the film, Burt Glennon, who used lights and shadows to illustrate the contrast between the darkly creepy and mysterious scenes with the more lighthearted scenes like this one. During his career, he was the cinematographer for many noteworthy films, including the original version of The Ten Commandments in 1923, John Ford's Stagecoach, which earned him an Oscar nomination, and the pioneering 3D movie House of Wax. A graduate of Stanford, Glennon's first time behind the camera was for the film Ramona. This 1916 picture was directed by actor Donald Crisp and featured the big screen debut of 4-year-old Anne Dvorak. During the next several decades, some of Glennon's many films included Blonde Venus, starring Marlene Dietrich, The Hurricane and Drums Along the Mohawk, both directed by John Ford, Our Town, which was produced by Saul Lesser, and Dive Bomber, a war film that earned Glennon his second Oscar nomination. But Glennon wasn't just a cinematographer. In 1928, he was given the chance to direct a film, and the following year he directed Syncopation, the first picture released by RKO. Glennon was called the new genius of the screen in an ad for one of his pictures, and he was praised by critics for his masterly work as a director. Still, he really didn't make much of a splash in that area, and after directing fewer than a dozen films, he decided to stick with cinematography. For his efforts on The Red House, Glennon attracted the notice of several reviewers, including Gene Ring for the Bangor, Maine Daily News, who found that his use of sunlight and shadows was exceptionally effective. He moved to the small screen in the 1950s, serving as director of photography on shows like 77, Sunset Strip. He retired in 1963, but his son James followed in his footsteps behind the camera, working as cinematographer for several movies, as well as two of my favorite HBO series, Carnival and Deadwood. And, fun fact about Burt Glennon, he reportedly had a phobia about being photographed and refused to allow his picture to be taken. Now, since we have three of the young members of the cast at the table here, let's take a look at another one, Julie London. If you're like me, you may have first known about London from the 1970s TV series Emergency, where she played Nurse Dixie McCall. It wasn't until years later that I learned about her career as both a screen actress and a singer. She was born Nancy Gail Peck in Stockton, California in 1926, and one of her cousins was songwriter Tell Taylor, who wrote the popular standard Down by the Old Mill Stream in 1910. For a while, her parents hosted a radio show, and London made her performing debut on that show at the age of 3, imitating Marlene Dietrich singing Falling in Love Again. Her mother often sang in nightclubs in the area, and London did as well during her teen years, frequently singing on the radio and performing at local theaters as part of the pre-movie entertainment. Her family later moved to Los Angeles, and she attended Hollywood High School while working as an elevator operator at Ruse Brothers department store. Although she didn't have much interest in appearing on the big screen, a chance elevator operator with Alan Ladd's agent wife Sue Carroll led to her first movie role. It was a low-budget jungle adventure called Nabanga. A couple of years later, she signed a contract with Universal, but her first big role, the part of Tibby in The Red House, was a loan-out from Universal to Saul Lesser. For her appearance in the film as Tibby, London got good notices, but almost every single review focused more on her sex appeal than her acting ability. One critic said she was sultry, provocative, and fresh as a new-mown hayfield. Another said she was definitely the teenage oomph girl, and another declared that she was a cinch to remind the boys of a sprouting Ava Gardner. The reviewer for the New York Daily News said she was the provocative type, calling her a potential Lana Turner, and the Chicago Tribune said she handled her role as a flamboyantly sexy high school senior with the ease of a practiced siren. And the critic for the Times, the picture paper in Minneapolis, noted her trim figure and enticing manner, adding that she was sure to be popular. By the way, you might recognize the name of this last critic. It was Harry Reasoner, who would go on to be an Emmy-winning journalist and one of the original hosts of the long-running CBS TV news magazine, 60 Minutes. Meanwhile, after the release of The Red House, Saul Lesser signed London to a personal contract. It was announced that she would next appear opposite John Garfield in Moonrise, but that part was ultimately given to Gail Russell. Instead, London was seen as Susan Hayward's devious younger sister in Tap Roots. Toward the end of filming this Civil War picture, London announced that she was engaged to actor Jack Webb, who she'd first met years earlier when she was just 15. London appeared in only a handful of films during the next several years. She focused instead on her family, which included 2 daughters, but by 1954 the marriage was over. The same year of her divorce from Webb, London visited a local nightclub in Hollywood that was featuring a trio led by a singer, pianist, and songwriter named Bobby Troup. One of the songs he wrote was the popular tune Route 66. After impulsively performing a number with the band, London began dating Troup, who helped her resume her professional singing career. The couple married in 1959, had 3 children, and remained together until Troup's death in 1999. Now, I'm going to pause here for a minute or two because there's a conversation coming up between Tibby and Teller that I'd like you to hear. Let's wait for that.
Hi, Teller.
Headed for home?
Uh-huh.
That's what I figured. Been swimming?
How'd you know?
Got your suit in that bag, haven't you?
What are you doing here?
Waiting for you.
What for?
I want you to do me a favor. You've got looks and all the rest besides. Besides that, I figure you're the kind that's got more sense in your head than comes out of your mouth.
Maybe I have. What kind of favor you want out of me?
I've got $750. I want you to buy me a government bond.
$750? Where'd you get it? Just steal it?
I want you to buy me that bond. Have them write my name on it and buy it the next time you go to town. There's an extra 10 for your trouble.
Oh, I couldn't take
Sure you could. And keep your mouth shut to boot. I'll be waiting every Sunday till you bring it.
Why don't you buy it yourself?
Because a guy in the village bank's got too long a nose. And because it'll be a prettier bond if you buy it for me.
I better get home.
Just keep that exchange in mind. Back to London, she went on to record 30 studio albums. Her most popular single, Cry Me a River, sold 3 million copies, and she was named the most popular female vocalist by Billboard magazine in 1955, 56, and 57. By the way, if you've never heard Julie London sing Cry Me a River, you can find it on YouTube. You only owe it to yourself to check it out, trust me. London also made a comeback in feature films, which included one of my favorite westerns, Man of the West, starring Gary Cooper. In the early 70s, both London and her husband were offered roles on a new NBC TV series about paramedics with the Los Angeles Fire Department. The show, Emergency, was a spin-off of Adam 12, which was a spin-off of Dragnet. All 3 series were produced by Jack Webb's production company, Mark 7 Limited. Over the years, Webb had become a friend of the family, and he even had a partnership with Bobby Troup in a restaurant in Toluca Lake. Emergency was canceled in 1977 after 6 seasons, marking the end of London's acting career, with the exception of a couple of made-for-TV movies. A 1979 operation to remove her thyroid gland put an end to her singing career, and she died in 2000, just a year after Bobby Troup. Now, before I go any further, I want to again direct your attention to the film and what's going to be said in this conversation coming up.
You'll either protect these woods of mine or I'll get someone who can.
Well, why don't you keep your trespassers to home? You gave me full rights to the Ox Head Woods, exclusive.
I gave you the game rights in exchange for keeping trespassers out.
Look, Mr. Morgan, if you can't keep your own hired hand out of these woods, maybe I should use more than a club to scare them away with.
Well, why don't you?
You telling me I can use my gun?
I don't want anybody to get hurt, but there's no better way of backing up a no trespassing sign than by a bullet missing somebody's skull.
Okay, Mr. Morgan, I'll take care of my end. This is going to be fun.
And it's going to be more than that. It's your last chance.
The reason I wanted you to hear that conversation between Pete and Teller is because none of that happened in the book, not even remotely. It was a complete creation of the screenwriters. In the book, the only encounter between Pete and Teller comes at the very beginning of the story, after Ellen convinces Pete that he should hire someone to help around the farm. Pete wants Meg to find the strongest boy at her school, and she immediately thinks of Teller. She takes Teller to the farm to meet Pete about the job, but when Teller learns that Pete is only paying 50 cents a day, he turns it down. Actually, what he says is, "You ton of beef, who do you think I am? Kiss you and your 50 cents," which I actually thought was pretty funny. In any event, in the book, that's how Nath comes to work at the farm. Meg thought of him after Teller refused the job. Now, as far as the book and what Teller's doing in Oxhead Woods, I'll get to that a little later. For now, I'd like to tell you about this actress, Judith Anderson, who for my money is one of the screen's most talented and most versatile performers. During a career that spanned 7 decades, she won 2 Emmy Awards and a Tony Award and was nominated for both an Academy Award and a Grammy. She was born Frances Margaret Anderson in 1897 in Adelaide, South Australia, where she was a self-proclaimed tomboy who was no fan of school. She loved to perform, though, and while she had a lovely singing voice, she set her sights from an early age on a career as an actress. Using the name Francie Anderson, she made her stage debut in 1915, and before long she was getting good reviews in numerous productions. The only problem was that the parts were always minor ones, so after a few years, at the age of 20, she made the decision to try her luck in America. She first attempted to break into the movies. She even had a letter of introduction to director Cecil B. DeMille. But as Anderson later said, he took one look at this Australian waif, no looks, no clothes, no nothing. He wasn't interested. But Anderson didn't give up. Instead, she headed for New York, and after a few months of what she called poverty and despair, she found work with a touring stock company. A year after changing her first name to Judith, she got her big break in the 1924 Broadway production of Cobra, opposite Louis Calhern. One critic wrote that she had a certain strangeness that made her irresistible, which I think is a perfect description of Anderson. She would continue to appear in Broadway productions throughout the remainder of her acting career. These included The Old Maid, in the role played by Miriam Hopkins in the 1939 movie, Hamlet with John Gielgud, Medea in a modernized adaptation that was written especially for her, and Macbeth with Maurice Evans, who was a great Shakespearean actor, but who I know best for his roles in Planet of the Apes and TV's Bewitched. Anderson's movie career began in 1933 with the steamy pre-code Blood Money starring Fay Wray, and if you ever get a chance to see it, please be sure you do. Over the next 5 decades, she was in fewer than 30 feature films, but these consisted of unforgettable roles in movies like Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca, which was only her second picture, but she earned an Oscar nomination for playing the cold and creepy housekeeper Mrs. Danvers. Some of her other well-known parts were Anne Treadwell in Laura, who didn't commit murder, but she was capable of it, the title character's cruel aunt in The Strange Love of Martha Ivers, the devoted and emotional Big Mama in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and the shrewd servant Memnit in The Ten Commandments. And she was also one of the many celebrities who made an appearance in Stage Door Canteen. The movie I told you earlier was directed by Delmer Daves, produced by Saul Lesser, and served as Lon McCallister's big break. Also, I think my very first exposure to Judith Anderson was in the 1970 film A Man Called Horse, where she played a Native American named Buffalo Cowhead. She played her last screen role at the age of 87. She was the Vulcan High Priestess in Star Trek III. On the small screen, she did mostly made-for-TV movies and anthology series, but she was also seen for 3 years on the daytime soap opera Santa Barbara, where she was the aristocratic matriarch of the family, Minx Lockridge. I love that name. For her performance, she was nominated for a Daytime Emmy. As for the Red House, Anderson had fond memories of her experience on the set. In a 1971 interview with author Charles Higham, she said Edward G. Robinson was fun to be with and turned in a magnificent performance, and she praised Delmer Daves as both a director and a human being. However, she did remember Daves telling Edward G. Robinson to be aware of his eyebrows, and Anderson didn't understand why Daves gave this direction. She said that Daves told her, "He's got big eyebrows. When he's talking to you, he raises them 1/8 of an inch, but on screen, he raises them 8 feet." The actress also noted the on-location shooting for the Red House and recalled that the woodsy areas caused her allergies to act up. "My eyes were running and it was just frightful," she said, but she added that overall she had a very, very happy experience. Because Anderson's part in the film was more low-key, some critics overlooked her, but she was mentioned in several reviews, with the New York Times critic noting her taut performance, Jean Ring in the Bangor, Maine Daily News saying she was excellent, and Variety's reviewer writing that she brought her usual depth and assurance to the part. And although Hazel Flynn of the Valley Times was disappointed that Anderson didn't have more to do in the movie, She said the very presence of this fine actress makes the Red House a little out of the ordinary. By the way, it's interesting to note that right around the time that filming began on the Red House, an item in the April 20th, 1946 issue of Showman's Trade Review said the role of Ellen would be played by an actress named Ruth Nelson. You might recognize her from movies like A Tree Grows in Brooklyn and Humoresque. It wasn't until a month later, well into filming, that that same publication reported that it was Judith Anderson who would play this featured role. In 1960, Anderson was made a Dame Commander of the British Empire, and just before her death in 1992, at the age of 94, she was made a Companion of the Order of Australia. Incidentally, between all of this activity, she had 2 brief marriages, which she once said were, quote, much too long. Now, before I go any further, I want to start tying up a few loose ends with regard to what happens in the book and what happens in the film. I think this is a good place to begin because in the scene we're watching now, Teller is going to start shooting at Meg, per Pete's instructions to do whatever it takes to keep trespassers away, and she'll end up falling and breaking her leg. And as you may have guessed, that's not the way things went down in the book. You might remember earlier, I told you about 2 characters who were in the book but not in the movie, the Morgan's housekeeper Lottie and her son Lot. Well, there's also another character who's prominent in the book but missing from the movie, and that's Teller's father. His name is Reds. And it's this character who leads to one of the biggest differences between the book and the film. Reds is a bootlegger, and along with Teller, he operates his business in Oxhead Woods. Because of this illegal enterprise, he's the one trying to keep people out of the area. It was Reds, for instance, who clobbered Nath in the woods earlier in the story. But Reds doesn't shoot at Meg when she goes looking for the Red House. He physically attacks her. I mean, he literally picks her up and throws her, and that's how she breaks her leg. And in the book, she also breaks 2 ribs. The whole thing is really very violent and disturbing to read. And one more thing I'll clear up here. You'll recall the scene where Teller gives Tibby $750 and asks her to buy a bond for him? Well, you might feel like most people who see that scene and conclude that it makes no sense. I even recall a few reviews mentioning it, like the critic for the Chicago Tribune who wrote, Rory Calhoun is quite a character, but I'm still wondering about the $750 he had. In the film, there's no context for this, no reason for Teller to have so much money, and no explanation for why he asked Tibby to buy the bond. But in the book, Teller gives Tibby $300 and asks her to buy him 6 $50 bonds. When the bootlegging operation is revealed later on, it becomes clear that Teller wants the bonds for a kind of money laundering scheme. By having Tibby buy the bonds, he's able to convert his cash into a less suspicious and less attention-getting asset. However, because this entire bootlegging plot doesn't exist in the movie, the purchase of the bond doesn't have any kind of rationale. But let me be clear. Even though I think the screenwriters should have left the bond purchase out of the movie altogether, I think they were spot on with their decision to disregard the bootlegging plot and focus instead on the mystery of the Red House and the secrets of the Morgan family. It just makes for a much better story. I'll share more about the book a little later, but for now, as we see Meg suffering from her accident in the woods, I'd like to talk about the filming that was done on location. And this, by the way, was just the second picture in Edward G. Robinson's career where he did filming outside of a studio. The only other on-location filming he had done before that was in the 1932 pre-code Tiger Shark, where he spent a few days in San Diego and off the coast of Mexico. The location shoot for the Red House took place over 6 weeks in California's Tuolumne and Calaveras counties, located about 350 miles from Hollywood, halfway between Oakland and the Nevada border. This was a popular area for filming, and it was used for many movies, including Wells Fargo, a Western starring Joel McCrea, The Romance of Rosie Ridge, which was Janet Leigh's first picture, and Henry Fonda's film debut, The Farmer Takes a Wife. More than 100 cast and crew members descended on Sonora, California in late April 1946. An article in Screenland magazine reported that many residents let permanent guests of local hotels stay in their homes so the hotel rooms could be offered to the Hollywood visitors. Those who couldn't be accommodated at the hotels stayed at nearby ranches or the area high school. and 2 electricians even slept in empty cells at the city jail. The cast ended up becoming such a vital part of the community that the city appointed Robinson honorary chief of police, Delmer Daves as honorary mayor, and Judith Anderson as justice of the peace. For shooting, 15 different locations were used, including buildings in Columbia, California, that served as Nath's mother's general store and the town hall where you see her before she leaves for her honeymoon. The building used for the Red House itself was also located in Columbia. Other locations were the 160-acre Bowlesby Apple Ranch, which at the time was the largest of its kind in California, and the farm scenes were filmed on the 650-acre Table Mountain Ranch near Murphy's. According to Movieland magazine, the Table Mountain Ranch was especially ideal because it included a main house, blacksmith shop, barn, and other outbuildings that were all seen in the film. It's interesting to note that the owners of the ranch were Fred Kinney, a bachelor, and his unmarried sister, Bertha, just like in the film. Even the animals on the Table Mountain Ranch were used, including cows, birds, and ducks from a pond near the house. A newspaper from New Brunswick, Canada, contained a story about the ducks, which may or may not have been true, but it was entertaining nonetheless. The article says that the sound of the ducks quacking was sometimes incorporated into the movie, but there were other times when Delmer Daves needed silence on the set, so the sound man would ring a bell. To keep the ducks quiet, they would be given breadcrumbs. The ducks quickly came to understand that when the bell rang, they were supposed to stop quacking, but if they didn't, some food would soon be coming their way. And let's just say there were a lot of breadcrumbs passed out on the set, or so the story goes. Also in the film were 50 students and the school bus driver from Sonora Union High School, who can be spotted at several scenes in the early part of the movie. The film even used the bus from the school and painted over the name Sonora so that you only see Union High School on the side of the vehicle. After the scenes using the extras were in the can, the location sites became a popular attraction, with many students from the high school showing up every day to watch the filming. Movieland magazine said that Lon McCallister and Rory Calhoun were of particular interest to the female students. In fact, they were such an attraction, readers were told, that 27 of the high schoolers almost got expelled from school for cutting classes to visit the movie set. McCallister said he didn't know why the students were so drawn to him. Heck, I've only made 3 pictures so far, he said, and I've been in the Army for the past 2 years. I can't understand it. And according to Delmer Daves, quote, they were just as noisy as you would think they would be. We finally had to put up fences 500 yards from where we were shooting. Those little gals were really holding up the works. Now, I know I've mentioned the name of the film's producer, Saul Lesser, several times already, but I haven't told you anything about his life. I'd like to do that here. Once called one of the shrewdest operators in the business, Lesser was born in 1890 in Spokane, Washington. His introduction to the film industry came through his father's San Francisco Nickelodeon. These were early movie theaters that charged a nickel for admission and showed mostly short, silent films. When Lesser was 17, his father died, and he inherited the Nickelodeon. He later built the family business into a theater chain and eventually owned or co-owned nearly 175 theaters. A large chunk of the financing for Lesser's theater expansion came in 1913. That's when Lesser and future cinematographer Hal Moore learned that San Francisco authorities were going to shut down the city's infamous Barbary Coast district. Lesser and Moore shot footage of the saloons, brothels, and gambling dens in the area, and then created a 10-minute short that they called Last Night of the Barbary Coast, and they racked up when they sold that film to theaters. Ironically, the Barbary Coast section wasn't actually cleared out until 4 years later. In 1920, Lesser joined with brothers Mike and Abe Gore to found the West Coast Theaters. This chain would go on to become the main first-run theater chain in the Pacific States. A few years later, he became a co-founder of First National Pictures, and he began producing both short films and feature-length pictures. One of his earliest hits was Oliver Twist, starring Jackie Coogan. Lesser had signed Coogan to a contract after his hit in The Kid with Charlie Chaplin. At the age of 36, Lesser decided to retire. He sold his interest in the West Coast theaters and set out on a 2-year world cruise. but it didn't take long for him to get bored with all this leisure time, so he returned to Hollywood. Once back home, he bought a small theater that would be the first of California's principal theater chain. He also established a production company called Principal Pictures and started producing the Tarzan features and a series of westerns starring actor Buck Jones. In addition to these, Lesser produced films like That Uncertain Feeling, an Ernst Lubitsch comedy starring Merle Oberon and Melvin Douglas, and Kon-Tiki, a 1950 Norwegian documentary that earned him an Oscar. He had personal contracts with several performers like Louise Beavers and Richard Arlen, child performers Baby Peggy and Bobby Breen, and Annette Kellerman, the Australian swimming star who Esther Williams would play in her movie Million Dollar Mermaid. As I said earlier, he also had personal contracts with three of the younger members of the Red House cast, Roberts, McCallister, and London, and he planned to star them together in future projects, but they never worked together again. Outside of producing more than 100 films, Lesser is credited with several innovations in the movie industry. He reportedly came up with the idea of having movie stars make personal appearances at movie previews, and it's said that it was Lesser's idea to create specific designations for adult films, movies for children, and horror films. This led to the letter rating system for movies that's still used today. Later in his career, Lesser taught cinematography at the University of Southern California, and after an unsuccessful attempt to open a museum of motion picture technology, he donated numerous artifacts to the USC School of Cinematic Arts. These included the mixing board used to record the 1927 movie The Jazz Singer. Lesser even continued his own education, earning a master's degree in film education from USC when he was 86 years old. He died in Hollywood a few years later, but he certainly left an undeniable impact on the industry that he loved. As we watch Lon McCallister and Allene Roberts in this beautifully lit scene, I want to return to Roberts' life and career, starting with her experience on the Red House. The first scene she filmed was with Edward G. Robinson. She recalled in her 2009 interview that Robinson could tell how nervous she was and that he went out of his way to put her at ease. He always played the bad guy in most every picture he did, she said, but he was anything but bad. He was the sweetest person to work with. I just really loved him. She also received support from director Delmer and remembered a scene where she had to cry. When the scene ended, she said that tears were rolling down Dave's face and she was thrilled that she had made that kind of impression on him. But Robert's most important relationship from the film was with her co-star Lon McCallister. The two remained close friends until McCallister's death in 2005. She earned glowing approval after release of the film, with critics noting her keen sense of timing, amazingly convincing work, and a wistful, expressive face. In the LA Times, Philip Schuer called Roberts a real find, saying she was winsome like Teresa Wright, with an appealing loneliness. And the critic for the Chicago Tribune said that Roberts quietly stole the picture. In one of her best reviews, Hazel Flynn wrote in the Valley Times, "If Allene can keep up her good work, she has a wonderful future ahead of her. She is a frail, willowy type, not over pretty, but with huge dark eyes and a most expressive face. In fact, she just has that indescribable something that's photogenic, plus natural dramatic ability." As it turned out, Roberts' acclaimed performance in the Red House didn't do much for her career, despite Saul Lesser promoting her in advertisements as the Mary Pickford of the talkies. Her best work after the Red House was the 1949 film Knock on Any Door, starring Humphrey Bogart. Roberts played the sweet-natured girlfriend of a juvenile delinquent accused of murder. The film was produced by Bogart's production company, Santana, and Roberts recalled that Bogart had specifically wanted her for the part. Another good film was Union Station, starring William Holden, where Roberts played a wealthy blind girl who's kidnapped by a trio of thugs. Roberts focused mostly on the small screen during the next several years, but she would only appear in a couple of TV series after 1955, when she married pharmaceutical rep Ralph Cochran. Roberts and Cochran were from the same small town in Alabama and had actually first met when they were children. They settled in Huntsville, Alabama, had 4 children, and remained together until Ralph's death in 1989. Roberts would live another 30 years, dying in 2019 at the age of 90. Now, before I continue, I'd like you to focus your attention on Pete Morgan and the rest of this scene. Let's check it out.
No, I was just about to go to sleep.
Good. Sleep soundly, Jeannie.
I want you to put a pin in that because this is another exchange that never happened in the novel. You'll see why shortly. Meanwhile, the life and career of Edward G. Robinson. Let's get into it. In this film, Robinson is playing a character who's far different from the gangster roles that he's so closely associated with. And speaking of being different from the gangster role, the real-life Robinson was fluent in several languages. He was an avid art collector, although sadly he lost most of his collection in a divorce. And he had a circle of friends that included some of the most respected writers, artists, and musicians of his time. He was born Emanuel Goldenberg in Bucharest, Romania in 1893, one of 6 brothers. When one of his brothers was the victim of an anti-Semitic attack, the family immigrated to the United States, winding up on the Lower East Side of New York. Initially, he wanted to be a criminal attorney, but he decided to pursue acting while he was a student at the City College of New York. After he won a scholarship to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, he changed his name. He selected the last name after attending a play in which the butler announced, "Madam, a gentleman to see you, a Mr. Robinson," and he chose Edward after the former King of England. "Good enough for a king, good enough for an Emmanuel," he said in his autobiography. And he used the letter G because he didn't want to desert the name Goldenberg entirely. He used it as a way of maintaining, as he called it, a private treaty with his past. Now, I'm going to interrupt myself here because I want you to take a look at what's about to happen in this scene. And keep an eye on the table.
Don't lie to me, Pete.
Why should I quarrel with a boy?
For the same reason you killed Jeannie's husband. Because you wanted her all to yourself.
I wanted to point out that scene because of an item that appeared in a 1946 issue of Exhibitor's Herald. The publication said that Robinson was supposed to pick up an expensive Chinese teakwood table and in a rage hurl it at Judith Anderson, injuring her and destroying the antique. When Delmer Daves was ready to film the scene, the property man interrupted, telling Robinson to pause just long enough for him to substitute a breakaway table. Robinson asked the prop man about the value of the antique. He was told that the antique table was worth $500 and the breakaway cost around $5. And Robinson reportedly replied, "As an actor interested in realism, I would use the antique. But since I'm a business partner in this picture, give me the copy." That's all. I just like that story. Oh, and a couple more things. On the screen, in just a moment, you'll see Nath's mother and Don, the man she just married. And in the next scene, you're going to see Meg being examined by Dr. Byrne. I want to take just a few minutes to tell you about the actors playing these 2 characters before I return to Edward G. Robinson. Don was played by Walter Sandy, who's one of those actors with a familiar face and a name you may not know. Even Sandy himself once told a columnist, "Everybody thinks they know me from somewhere, but they never know from where." I remember him best as the guy who charters the boat into Have and Have Not, Montgomery Clift's lawyer in A Place in the Sun, and the diner owner who serves chili and beans to Spencer Tracy in Bad Day at Black Rock. He was in more than 200 movies during his career and nearly 100 TV shows, including The Farmer's Daughter, where he played the father of the title character, or the farmer's daughter's father, if you will. A couple of fun facts about Sandy. He claimed he was able to play almost every instrument except the piano, and he used his woodworking skills to make and sell furniture to celebrities like Charlton Heston and Gig Young. As for the actor playing Dr. Byrne, his name is Harry Shannon. He made many film noir appearances. He was in a dozen pictures from that era, but you might recognize him from movies like Citizen Kane, where he played Kane's father, or Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream House, where he was seen as a water well digger. He started out in vaudeville when he was just 15, and several years later, he was in Broadway hits like Hold Everything, in a cast that also included Ona Munson. He was later in the first all talking feature produced by Paramount at its Astoria, New York studio, and his last big screen appearance was in the 1962 film Gypsy, starring Natalie Wood. Now, back to Robinson. He started acting in Yiddish theater, debuted on Broadway a few years later, and eventually became one of the most sought after stage actors of the day. He made his first talking picture in 1929, playing a mobster in The Hole in the Wall with Claudette Colbert. In the next 2 years, he made 14 films, including Little Caesar, playing the role that made him a household name. Robinson went on to star in countless big screen classics. Some of my favorites include Double Indemnity, Key Largo, The Sea Wolf, Scarlet Street, House of Strangers. Really, the list goes on and on and on. And I'll never quite get over the fact that he was never nominated for an Academy Award for any of them. After he teamed up with Saul Lesser in 1946, Robinson explained his interest in the role of Pete Morgan, telling a reporter, "The man who becomes evil because his natural impulses are diverted into the wrong channels is just as human as any other. It could happen to any of us." Robinson also said he had a measure of sympathy for the character and that he considered the part to be one of the best he'd ever had. His performance was universally praised. The critic for the Brooklyn Eagle said he created a fuller and more interesting character than he had in many months. The Syracuse Herald-Journal said he was at his solid best in a role which allows him to work himself into a convincing frenzy. And Variety's reviewer wrote, "Histrionically, Robinson has a field day. He breathes life into the central figure, pulsing it into complete plausibility." I love how they wrote back then, don't you? Anyway, although Robinson said he was totally unsuited for being a producer, he did admit that the movie made, as he termed it, a few bucks. To be more specific, the film had a budget of $1 million, and it made approximately $4.5 million at the box office, so a little more than a few bucks. After the release of The Red House, Hedda Hopper announced that Thalia's next picture would be an adaptation of the 1937 novel Harness Bull. Hopper also said the film would star Robinson and that Allene Roberts would probably play the female lead. As it happened, the movie did get made with Robinson under the name Vice Squad, but it didn't come out until 1953, and it co-starred Paulette Goddard. Also, the film was produced through a partnership between Saul Lesser and three other men. Another movie, I Heard Them Sing, was announced as a Thalia project even before the release of The Red House. It was to once again star Robinson, but that movie was never made. The Red House would be the first and only film to be produced by Saul Lesser and Edward G. Robinson. Meanwhile, it's around this time that Robinson's personal life took a turn, and that's putting it mildly. Based on information from, quote, confidential informants, he was accused by the FBI as being a member of the Communist Party. A few years later, his name was included in Red Channels, a publication that listed 151 writers, directors, and performers who were suspected of communist ties. Seemingly overnight, Robinson's offers dried up, and he was only able to find work in some fairly forgettable B pictures. He once said, "It's like I was accused of being a rabbit. I've never been a rabbit, but how can I prove I was not a rabbit?" In an effort to clear his name, Robinson appeared in 3 closed-door sessions before the House Un-American Activities Committee. In the third, held in April 1952, Robinson testified, quote, "I now realize that some of the organizations which I permitted to use my name were in fact communist fronts. I was duped and used." Despite this admission, which appeared in newspapers nationwide, it would be another 4 years before Robinson would appear in a major Hollywood production. This would be The Ten Commandments in 1956. In 1972, Robinson began work on what would be the 88th feature film of his career, Soylent Green, a science fiction thriller with Charlton Heston. Sadly, during the production, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he died 3 months after filming concluded in January 1973 at age 79. Before his passing, he had been notified by the Motion Picture Academy that he would be receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award. In presenting the award to Robinson's widow in March of that year, Charlton Heston shared the award's inscription, which read, "To Edward G. Robinson, who achieved greatness as a player, a patron of the arts, and a dedicated citizen. In sum, a Renaissance man." Now, on the screen with Julie London and Lon McCallister, we see Rory Calhoun, the only one of the junior cast members who I have yet to discuss. You might say I saved the most interesting story for last. Calhoun was once described as a younger version of Humphrey Bogart, Zachary Scott, and Alan Ladd, but his life off-screen was often worthy of its own movie. He was born Francis Timothy McCown in 1922 in Los Angeles. In a 1947 issue of Screenland magazine, he said his mother, quote, "let me revel in a regular Tom Sawyer boyhood. I played hooky from school whenever I could, and while I was little enough, I got lickings for it." Unfortunately, Calhoun's Tom Sawyer boyhood consisted of activities that ranged from swiping money from newsstand boxes and taking produce from the local grocer to stealing a gun. For several years, he was in and out of reformatories, and his rap sheet grew every time he was released, eventually including burglary and grand theft auto. At the age of 17, after committing a federal offense by driving a stolen car across state lines, he was sent to the El Reno Reformatory in Oklahoma and later to the federal prison in Springfield, Missouri. He was to remain there until his 21st birthday, when he would be transferred to San Quentin Prison. Fortunately, while he was at El Reno, Calhoun caught the attention of the chaplain, Father Don Cannelly, who the future actor credited with turning his life around. Years later, Calhoun said that Cannelly, quote, "put me on the straight and narrow by teaching me to pray and respect myself, and he taught me values that I hadn't learned as a youngster." It's not clear exactly how it happened, but the holdover charges that were against him were eventually dropped. This meant that he wasn't transferred to San Quentin, and that when he turned 21, he was a free man. He left his criminal past behind him, and he never looked back. Sources vary wildly on what Calhoun did once he left prison. He engaged in a series of odd jobs, but how many of these are true is anybody's guess. They include working at an ironworks plant, as a mechanic, as a hard rock miner in Nevada and a cowboy in Arizona, in the oil fields in Oklahoma, as a fisherman, a dump truck driver, a net hauler for fishing boats, a boxer, a crane operator, and a forest firefighter. Most agree, though, that he was working as a lumberjack in California when his life took a completely different path. Here, too, the truth is a little murky. According to one story, which, by the way, was told by Calhoun himself, he was horseback riding on a bridle path in the Hollywood Hills one day when he encountered actor Alan Ladd. Ladd saw Calhoun's movie star good looks, invited him to lunch, and introduced him to his wife, Sue Carroll, who took Calhoun to Fox Studios the very next day. Other sources say this story is a lot of hooey. Instead, they claim that Calhoun's career kicked off when he was hanging outside Paramount Studios looking for work as an extra and met an employee of Sue Carroll's agency who got him a screen test at Fox. Either way, Calhoun did sign a contract with Fox, and he started appearing in small parts in movies like Sunday Dinner for a Soldier, starring Ann Baxter, where he had exactly two lines: "Look, strawberry cake," and "Does she have a sister?" Calhoun got his first big break in the boxing biopic The Great John L., about heavyweight champion John L. Sullivan. Calhoun played Gentleman Jim Corbett, the only man to ever defeat Sullivan. He was credited as Frank McCown, but by the time the film was released in 1945, Calhoun had been dropped by Fox. The actor said he'd been told by the studio that he had no talent. But things weren't as grim as they sound. At a dinner party, Calhoun had met a talent scout for producer David O. Selznick by the name of Henry Wilson. Wilson would later open his own talent agency, where his clients would include Rock Hudson, Tab Hunter, Robert Wagner, and Rory Calhoun. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. After his initial meeting with Calhoun, Wilson persuaded Selznick to sign him to a 7-year contract. The first order of the day was to change his name, but once again, sources disagree on the way that Calhoun got that new name. One says that Selznick himself named him Rory because his zodiac sign was Leo. Leos are lions, and lions roar. Get it? Rory? But another source says that the name change was left to Wilson, who originally gave him the name Troy Donahue. After about a week, Wilson decided on a different name, settling on Rory because of the actor's short time working as a firefighter. Calhoun didn't appear in any Selznick productions, but the producer did start loaning him out, including to Saul Lesser for The Red House. Calhoun later said the film was his first big thrill in movies, and that he didn't think he would feel like that again unless he, quote, did something unlikely, like win an Academy Award. In an interview with author Ron Miller, Calhoun recalled that the part of Teller came down to him and one other actor, Robert Horton, who would later be known more for his TV work, including the Western series Wagon Train. Calhoun said that although Horton's screen test was better, Edward G. Robinson wanted Calhoun for the part. Robinson knew that Calhoun was inexperienced, though, so every night when the actors were on location, Robinson would invite Calhoun to his suite and go over his scenes with him. Calhoun wasn't overly commended by critics for his acting ability in The Red House, but that didn't mean he didn't attract their attention. The critic for the Syracuse New York Herald-Journal called him a beautiful hunk of young manhood, faintly suggestive of a young Victor Mature. Hazel Flynn in the Valley Times described him as a darkly handsome six-footer with a storybook name, and in the Democratic Chronicle of Rochester, New York, the reviewer said Calhoun would make the Bobby Soxers jump right out of their socks. During the next decade, Calhoun appeared in films like Massacre River, an underrated Western where he co-starred with his close friend Guy Madison, With a Song in My Heart, opposite Susan Hayward, which he always called his best picture, How to Marry a Millionaire, where he played the love interest of Betty Grable, and River of No Return, a Marilyn Monroe and Robert Mitchum vehicle where Calhoun was a standout as a sleazy gambler. But not long after River of No Return was released, Calhoun faced a threat that could have ended his career for good. This is what happened. You may have heard of a celebrity scandal magazine called Confidential. It premiered in 1952 with the tagline, "Tells the facts and names the names." By 1955, the magazine was publishing 5 million copies per issue. Now, you may remember earlier, I told you that one of the clients of talent agent Henry Wilson was Rock Hudson, who at that time was a closeted gay man. Well, Wilson found out the Confidential magazine planned to publish an expose revealing that Hudson was gay, which in the 1950s would have been devastating to Hudson's career. So Wilson made a deal with Confidential. If they would agree to squash the article on Hudson, he would tell them all about Rory Calhoun's criminal past. The magazine agreed, and in May 1955, Confidential's cover included a photo of Calhoun's mugshot from 22 years earlier, accompanied by the headline, "Movie Star Rory Calhoun, but for the grace of God, still a convict." As it turned out, the revelation about Calhoun's time behind bars had no impact on his career, at least not a negative one, but it was still a pretty shady thing for Wilson to do. Meanwhile, around this time, Calhoun left Fox for Universal Studios, where he concentrated mostly on westerns. He also wrote 2 novels and branched out into screenwriting. A couple of years later, he formed his own production company with talent agent Victor Orsatti. Under the title Roar Vic Productions, Calhoun produced and starred in 3 westerns, beginning with The Hired Gun in 1957. He also took his talents to the small screen, creating a western series for CBS called The Texan. After 2 seasons of starring in this series, he decided to return to feature films and leave the demanding pace of series work behind. He eased into character parts over the next several decades and guested on a variety of TV shows from Bonanza to Fantasy Island. He also starred in a horror cult classic in 1980 called Motel Hell, where he played a motel owner who kills his customers and grinds them into sausages. And he landed a role on a daytime soap opera called Capital, which ran on CBS for 5 years. Calhoun's last performance was in a 1993 episode of the small screen horror series Tales from the Crypt. But this isn't quite the end of Calhoun's story. As I said before, the actor's life away from the screen could have been its own movie. In the late 1940s, Calhoun had married Cuban actress and dancer Lita Barron. The two went on to have 3 daughters. Calhoun also had another daughter as the result of an affair he had during his marriage. In 1970, after learning that Lita had been unfaithful, Calhoun filed for divorce and sought custody of their 3 children. But Lita countersued, charging that the actor had had affairs with 79 women, including his How to Marry a Millionaire co-star, Betty Grable. Reportedly, Calhoun's response to this charge was, quote, "You didn't even name half of them." The year after his divorce from Lita was finalized, Calhoun married again and had another daughter, and he kept right on doing his thing until 1999, when he passed on at the age of 76. Now, a little earlier, I talked about the 6-week on-location shoot in Tuolumne and Calaveras counties. After the shoot ended in late June, the cast and crew filmed interiors at the RKO Pathé Studios in Culver City. And although the name of the film had been changed in May to No Trespassing, an item in Variety in October reported that the name had been changed back to The Red House, which was a recommendation from the sales chief for United Artists. On December 31st, 1946, a surprise preview was held at the Plaza Theater in Palm Springs, where Saul Lesser was a winter resident. The preview wasn't advertised, and the feature was shown only once. It was screened after the Betty Davis film Deception and turned out to be a special treat for moviegoers who had decided to spend part of their New Year's Eve in their local movie house. The press preview was held a month later at the Academy Awards Theater in Los Angeles, and the film's general release was on February 7, 1947. According to an item in the Exhibitor's Herald, Saul Lesser had an advertising budget of $250,000, which included a national tie-in with the Saturday Evening Post. This was the magazine, you'll recall, that had printed The Red House in serial form a few years earlier. Several provocative taglines were developed to promote the film, including "You dare not even guess the secret love story of the Red House," and "Of this man and the girl who lived in the Red House, people only spoke in whispers." And then there was the simple and straightforward, "She belongs to me." And there was another ad featuring a large photo of Edward G. Robinson's head that contained this dramatic pronouncement: "Seldom before so emotionally stark a screen drama of longing, never before so brilliant a characterization of love-crazed betrayal as this greatest of Robinson portrayals." Other material was designed specifically for exhibitors to encourage them to show the film in their theaters. One of these read, "Remember the house that Jack built? This is the house that will build Jack," meaning money for the theater, because Edward G. Robinson is in it, in a role even more powerful, more dramatic than his thrilling parts in Little Caesar and The Stranger, because Lon McCallister is in it, forever memorable to audiences after his heartwarming performances in Stage Door Canteen and Home in Indiana, because great new stars are in it: Julie London, Allene Roberts, and Rory Calhoun, names you and your audiences will long remember for their performances here, and the matchless artistry of wonderful Judith Anderson. This is the house that will build audiences for your house. But my favorite publicity idea was a contest developed in conjunction with a Syracuse, New York real estate company called the Pomeroy Organization. The promo material featured a picture of a red house. It stated that the house was situated somewhere on the city's south side, and readers were invited to find the house's exact location. The first 20 people to correctly identify the address would win 2 free tickets to see the Red House at the Lowe's Theater. Every day, the real estate company would put out ads that contained different clues to the location of the house. And they also offered this enthusiastic plug: the Red House and a host of other properties are on sale by the Pomeroy Organization, with the largest and best-equipped sales force ready to serve you. The film's publicity undoubtedly helped to make the film a big hit, and while it didn't garner any Academy Award nominations, it did win 2 Photoplay Awards, one for Best Picture of the Month for April, and one for Edward G. Robinson for Best Performance of the Month. Now, as we approach the climax of the film and the revelation of the secrets about the Red House, I want to share the final ways that the film differed from the book. As you know, in the film, Ellen is mistakenly shot and killed by Teller after she ventures into the woods with plans to burn down the red house. We also learn that when he was younger, Pete was in love with Meg's mother, a married woman named Jeannie. Jeannie's husband suspected that Pete and Jeannie were having an affair, and he planned to leave town with his family. But in trying to convince Jeannie to stay, Pete accidentally smothered her to death. He then killed her husband and buried their bodies in the ice house water. But the story in the book is vastly different from this. I'll try to keep it simple. Let's start with the shooting of Ellen, which in the book did not happen at all. Instead, the person who was shot was Lot, the son of the housekeeper, but he lived. Also, as a young man, the Pete in the book was in love with a woman named Elspeth, and Ellen was in love with a man named Hugh Snell. Ellen ends up getting pregnant, but instead of marrying her, Hugh forces Elspeth to marry him. Elspeth winds up committing suicide, and Pete kills Hugh, burying him in the ice house. Meanwhile, Ellen gives birth to a girl who grows up and gets married, but she dies giving birth to a daughter of her own. And that daughter was Meg, meaning that Ellen was Meg's grandmother and that Pete, as the book had stated early on, was Meg's granduncle. Meg's father died 5 years after his wife, but the book really doesn't care enough about him to give any other details. So this leaves just one more loose end, and that involves Tibby, Teller, and Teller's father, Reds. Because Reds needs transportation to haul away the barrels of moonshine that he's made in the woods, he instructs Teller to use his new relationship with Tibby to get her father's truck. Tibby thinks that she and Teller are going to get married, but she soon realizes the truth. Meanwhile, the police are alerted about Lot's shooting and the stolen truck. Tibby manages to escape, but Reds and Teller, with the police hot on their trail, wind up at the Morgan farm and crash the truck into the ice house water. And Pete, hallucinating that Reds is his old nemesis Hugh Snell, dives in after them, and all three sink into the water and drown. As in the movie, though, Nath and Meg do wind up together in the end. Now, coming up shortly, you'll see a motorcycle cop firing at Teller. He only has one line, but I'd still like to tell you a bit about the actor playing him. His name is Pat Flaherty, and he was in more than 200 movies, including so many that are bona fide classics. I don't even have time to tell you all the movies he was in that you've probably seen and definitely heard of, but I just have to mention some of them because it's such an amazing list. Here goes. The Thin Man, My Man Godfrey, The Pride of the Yankees, The Best Years of Our Lives, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, Key Largo, The Asphalt Jungle, His Girl Friday, The Grapes of Wrath, Yankee Doodle Dandy, Mutiny on the Bounty, and there are just so many more. Before he started acting, Flaherty played minor league baseball and 14 years of pro football for teams including my hometown team, the Chicago Bears. Once in Hollywood, he used his baseball skills to serve as technical advisor on films like Meet John Doe, where he taught Gary Cooper how to pitch, and The Babe Ruth Story, where he supported William Bendix in the title role. Now, coming up in a few moments is one more actor I want to tell you about. His name is Arthur Space, and he plays the sheriff. Space was born in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and he gained his first acting experience in summer stock theater and Broadway productions like Three Men on a Horse. Space made his big screen debut in a low-budget gangster film called Riot Squad. He only had a small part, but I get such a kick out of the review of the movie that appeared in Space's hometown paper, the Central New Jersey Home News. I just have to share it with you. It starts out saying that the film would have very little appeal to local audiences if it weren't for the appearance of Space in the cast, and that the picture's primary fault was that, quote, there isn't enough of Space's histrionics paraded before the cameras to stir one's emotions. And while acknowledging that Space only had around 10 lines, the reviewer wrote that his voice was very pleasing, quote, very Lionel Barrymore-ish, to be perfectly honest. We're coming into the home stretch now, where Pete and Meg will soon be seen entering the Red House. And this scene gives me the perfect chance to briefly circle back to two of the most fascinating parts of the film, the score by Miklós Rózsa and the cinematography by Burt Glennon. I have to be honest, though, There was a time back in the day when I would watch classic movies and I really didn't pay much attention at all to the cinematography or the music. But it's films like The Red House that gave me more of an understanding for these two aspects of filmmaking. Let's take a few moments to appreciate them here.
Step out of the door, he'll see us.
Why must we bolt the door?
Nothing has changed.
I think the camera work and the music in this scene work perfectly together to set the tone and the mood. They really underscore this feeling of inescapable doom. Rocha's use of the theremin and the women's chorus in particular create a kind of ghostly, otherworldly atmosphere. You can practically see Meg as a baby lying in the cradle. And Burt Glennon does amazing work with the lighting. It kind of wraps you up in a feeling of uneasiness. And he was especially masterful with his use of low-key lighting, like the effect that the lit candle has on the room. He not only uses this to emphasize the sensation of dread, but the partial shadows on Meg and Pete's faces reflect Pete's increasing madness and the fear that Meg feels in response. And the changes in the lighting seem to take the viewer right along with Pete as he becomes more and more lost in his memories of the past. It's interesting to note that back in 1924, Glennon himself spoke about the importance of camera work and lighting. He called photography the vehicle that carries the film's story. The photography must always be in perfect sympathy with the theme of the scene, he said. With these facts in mind, we light the picture. Now, at this time, as we watch these final moments of the film together, I'd like to say thank you so much for listening to my commentary. I enjoyed comparing the novel and the film, and I totally applaud Delmer Daves and Albert Maltz for their adaptation. They did a first-rate job in streamlining the plot of the book. Even though they decided to eliminate several characters and subplots, they still managed to maintain the basic framework and the integrity of the story. And they also demonstrated their creativity by adding completely new facets to the plot, like Ellen sacrificing her romance with Dr. Byrne in order to stay with Pete, and Meg being the daughter of the woman Pete loved and accidentally killed. And in creating the depiction of Pete's death, the screenwriters gave us an unforgettable series of images that I have to say I found to be absolutely terrifying. The film was a unique entry in the screen careers of both Edward G. Robinson and Judith Anderson, representing a refreshing departure from the kinds of roles that were usually associated with them, and it introduced audiences to a quartet of young performers who I think were each perfectly cast. I was especially impressed with Allene Roberts and Julie London, who both turned in memorable work, but truly, every one of the performers did an excellent job in bringing their characters to life. Overall, I'm in complete agreement with the critic from the New York Daily News that The Red House was a strangely fascinating picture skillfully directed by Delmer Daves. It gave audiences a combination of mystery, romance, horror, drama, action, and psychological thriller with a touch of film noir, and provided an experience that was chilling, suspenseful, and often unnerving, but one that still managed to end on a note of hope. And we see that hope reflected here in the final scene with the brightly lit landscape and the upbeat score, which both emphasize the feeling of promise for the future. But I'll let Nath have the last word.
Looking forward's much better than looking back.
This is Karen Burroughs Hannsberry saying so long and I'll catch you on the flip side.